And I would like to invite the chairman of the main panel, Minister Bogar, and main panelists, Prime Minister Leterme, Secretary General Amre Moussa, and Minister of State of India, Ms. Kaur, and Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Brazil, Ms. Ambassador Patriota, to take the stand. So, Ksenia, please.
Okay, I think we are ready to start the panel. Dear panelists, distinguished guests, before we start our panel, I would like to ask Secretary General Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe to read the message from the Secretary General of the UN, from the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. Thank you very much.
Mr. Minister, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for giving me this honor and opportunity to, first of all, be here as regular participants at the BLED Forum. And this time my role is indeed very honorable. I would like to read a statement and message to the Forum of the United Nations Secretary General, Mr. Ban Ki-moon. So I'm reading the text. The BLED Strategic Forum is an excellent opportunity to discuss some of the most pressing issues of our age. Every year, the organizers highlight fascinating and challenging subjects for discussion. In the past 2 years, you have debated the impact of climate change on energy security and the politics of the economic crisis. This year's topic, the global outlook for the next decade, promises to be just as timely and ambitious. This topic will undoubtedly allow for a dialogue around critical questions such as the state of current economic and financial systems, the challenges to global governance, and the changing nature of geopolitical arrangements. It will also cover the availability of resources, including energy, food, and water, against a backdrop of population growth and economic development. These are critical subjects for the United Nations and for the achievement of the Millennium Development Goals. With only 5 years remaining until the deadline of 2015, I am convening a summit in New York next month to mobilize global resources and accelerate progress. I'm confident that your discussions will have a positive impact on our efforts, and I look forward to hearing some of your conclusions there. I wish you fruitful talks and best wishes for your important dialogue. That was the message of the UN Secretary General, Mr. Ban Ki-moon. Thank you for your attention.
I want to thank Mr. Jankubic for delivering the message, and of course we want to thank Secretary General for taking his time and sending us a message for the conference also. Thank you for the nice words about the BLED Strategic Forum. So now we'll start with the discussion in the panel. Today's panel is titled Global Outlook for the Next Decade, as is the overreaching title of the forum itself. And we'll attempt to take the advantage of this moment of great opportunity, as it was mentioned before already in the previous speeches. And we'll try to look for the ideas how to deal with the future, how to deal with the next decade. I will ask my panelists to present their opening views as they feel comfortable from the chair, or if they want from the podium itself. And then I will open the floor for comments, for questions and answers. And first, I'll make a short introduction of our panelists, and then I'll give the floor. I'll start with the Prime Minister, Yves Le Terme, Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Belgium, which currently holds the rotating presidency of the European Union. His Excellency, Mr. Le Terme, was firstly appointed as Minister-President of the Flemish government in 2004, where his economic, budgetary and social measures were considered to be extremely efficient. Mr. Le Terme also served as a Vice Prime Minister of Belgium and the Minister of Budget, Transport, Institution Reform and the North Sea in 2007, before being sworn in as the Minister of Foreign Affairs and later as the Prime Minister. So, Mr. Prime Minister, we are honored that you came, and I want to give you the floor.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. I'm delighted to be here and to have the opportunity to say a few words on behalf of the Kingdom of Belgium, but moreover as holding the rotating presidency as the European Union, as you rightly stated. Congratulations also with this forum, the 5th in a row. I would say, to keep it short, that the most important word for the coming decade is the word global. We will discuss on global outlook, but I think just like it was during the last years, the consciousness, the most important progress lays in the consciousness that there is a growing interdependency of all the countries and peoples of the whole of the planet, when we are talking about the most essential problems we have to tackle. Problems like financial instability. I was leading the government at the moment where our bank system in Belgium was endangered, just like your banking system. And we saw this interdependency in the year 2008-2009 becoming very real, very concrete. I remember that Jean-Claude Trichet at a certain moment said, when I was asking him, a very sunny Sunday afternoon, which is not usual in Belgium, but it was a sunny Sunday afternoon in the month of October, and our banking system was endangered, and I asked him, Mr. Trichet, the President of the European Central Bank, how much time do I have to save my banking system? And he said, well, we are talking now at 4 p.m. The stock exchange is opening in the Far East at Belgium, Greenwich Mean Time, 10 o'clock in the evening, so you have exactly 7 to 8 hours. It's still for me an enormous illustration of the fact that this interdependency of the whole of our economies, the whole of our people, to tackle the main problems is the key issue and the key factor today, and it will still remain it in the coming decade. And I think that the consciousness that we are interdependent is growing, and we were asked to be positive and to be optimistic by the Prime Minister. I think that more and more governments, more and more national leaders in all kinds of countries really want also to act in this way and are prepared to try to find out new ways to give solutions to these problems, starting from the point of view that it's not so useful just to take measures in your own country. You have to put them in more than ever in a greater framework. Concerning the main issues, I think it is also very important when we are thinking about what will happen in the coming decade that we stay positive. I mean by this, there was a reference was made by the representative of Mr. Ban Ki-moon to the next meeting in next September, I think, about the evaluation of the MDGs. Well, it is very clear that in the fight against poverty, that we made progress. There are some hundreds of million people less that are poor in the world since, let's say, 10 years ago. The result is not enough. It's not a good result. It's not an excellent result, but still there is some progress. To come back to the word global, it is very clear to us, to everyone, that enhancing peace, tackling the global warming problem, tackling problems of poverty, the problem also of the lack of natural resources, the problems of the water supply, which will be discussed, I think, in this forum tomorrow. These are 4 or 5 very essential key issues that only can be tackled globally and through global governance. Concerning global governance, I think we made some progress. But in the coming 10 years, I think we should invest a lot in trying to solve 2 very important problems in this global governance, like it is for the moment, like it is used for the moment. First is, of course, the whole of the problems of the imbalance of power. We urgently need to rebalance the power within this global governance, and there it is the problem of the developing countries, of the new emerging economies, to give them their places in financial spheres and all kinds of multilateral organizations that we are all members of, but where you see that there has to be a shift of power towards these new economies and towards these developing countries. And there I think that we should overwin the kind of egoism sometimes which is ours. When we are discussing about the powers within the IMF, distribution of posts of directors, when we are discussing about composition of the G20, about the World Bank and so on, until now there have been some attempts to make some shift of powers and rebalancing of powers possible, but I think this is one of the very important issues for the coming 10 years. Second issue, I mentioned already the G20, which is quite new, a new phenomenon and growing importance of the last decades. I think it is very important that in the next 10 years we gain some more inclusiveness of this multilateral cooperation. I think it is very good that we use the flexibility of instruments like the G20 that can act theoretically very rapidly, that have the flexibility to respond very rapidly on urgent questions. But in the coming decades, we should look more careful upon the issue of having inclusiveness. There, of course, we have the UN and the debate about the reorganization of the UN, but I don't think we have to wait for solutions in that field to try to improve the inclusiveness. Talking on behalf of Europe, Europe has a very important role to play, of course, but I would also like to underline that it is very good that Europe now is challenged by more than one global force, that there are new players on the global level, new players like some are represented here in the panel. To stay a very important power, of course, Europe has to put order in its economy. It is for the next decade essentially, it's essential that we improve our economic power, our economic capacity. And this goes through courageous measures in the field of economic governance, of budgetary policy, but also investing in innovation, in infrastructure, in knowledge technology, in smart technology, and in greening the economy. This is one of the most important items now on the agenda on the European level, will be also in the meetings in September of October. Secondly, speaking about Europe, we are still one of the most important economic powers in the world, but we have quite a typical European socio-economic model. Our social security, our welfare state is at stake in the coming decade, and we have to defend it. And the economy growing global, becoming more and more global, this may not mean that we have to, let's say, to put aside our social or very typical European social security model. I would like to say on quite a provocative way that it has a kind of moral superiority, this model. And so we don't have to to diminish the importance of this model, we have to have enough economic growth to keep it in place and to give it as an example to the other parts of the world where until now we don't have the same schemes in the fields of unemployment, retirement, public health and others. Of course, to conclude, to have enough credibility as European Union, we will have to invest more than today political energy in our external policy, in our role on the international global level. We have agreed on the Lisbon Treaty which puts in place an external action service, but it is right that until now the external policy of the European Union was too diffuse, was not clear enough and was not powerful enough and maybe moreover was not always courageous enough, that we not always have taken the consequence of some viewpoints we have about solving problems all over the world. And I think we have to enhance our possibilities, our capacities in that field. This is a very important point on the agenda the coming weeks. The summit in the European Council in Brussels will have that on the agenda. It's very essential that the new possibilities of the Lisbon Treaty are seized to give Europe this more important power on the global level to act as a not only an economic power but also as a political power like it should do.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for your thoughts. I think you triggered several discussions that we might continue later on from the point of global to the G20 issue that you raised last night. We discussed with the Secretary General Amr Moussa the G20 and the UN relationship, and that's something probably that's interesting to discuss. You referred as inclusiveness, and of course the EU as a global player. We are looking forward to discussion that will follow this panel. But we'll come to that later on. First, now I want to turn to His Excellency Mr. Amr Moussa. Last night I revealed to him that we know each other for a very long time. I was a young diplomat with former State Secretary in the Foreign Ministry, Ignaz Golob, and at one of the non-aligned movement conferences way back in the early 90s, when I was accompanying Mr. Golob, we met, and he was already, Mr. Moussa at that time was already a distinguished leader in foreign policy. He's Secretary General of the League of the Arab States since 2001, and beforehand, Mr. Moussa has accumulated significant international experience through working at several Egyptian missions around the world, as well as, of course, serving as the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Egypt from 1991 to 2001. Your Excellency, I'll ask you to present your own thoughts on the next decade.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister, for your kind introduction. And like the Prime Minister, I wish to congratulate you on the choice of the issue to be discussed in this forum pertaining to the future decade and the outlook. The Prime Minister chose the word global to stress. I would stress the word uncertainty as to the future work within international relations, economic matters as well as security and other issues of importance to the international community. And in this brief introductory remarks, I would venture to refer to a few points. First of which is the economic and financial crisis that hit the world very seriously, the effects of which are still being felt. The way it is dealt with reflects the interests of the industrial part of the world. The developing nations, to different extents, were not really part of the, or cause of the problem, or part of the solution. The marginalization of this huge part of the international community calls for new approaches to deal with such problems like the economic problem, global problem. We will be faced in the midterm, the next decade, 2015, with the consideration of what have been decided in the year 2000 about development, about the goals of development, Millennium Development Goals, and I believe the report will not be that positive. We will be unable to report success in the implementation of the work that has been called for by the Millennium Document. It's not a question of document or how it was implemented, but the situation in several countries, in particular in Africa, and the statistics about poverty. I don't think that poverty has been ameliorated. The situation has seen less poverty so far. In fact, some UN statistics referred to the increase in the number of poor people. And of course, the natural disasters have helped reaching that conclusion. So, in the economic sphere, we need to do a lot. We are not doing fine. And in particular, the developing nations are not feeling that their economy, their demands, their rights have been taken care of in a cogent way. The second point that we are going to face in the next decade pertains to the relations between civilizations. We are still suffering from this clash that has been pushed, forced, and our work in universities, conferences, initiatives was indeed successful, but it did not trickle down to the masses in several countries. Amongst us, we have no clash of civilizations between you and me, or several of us, or in academia, or in international conferences, in churches. There is no clash here. The clash rests with the extreme wings in all civilizations, without exception. We recently heard this sad episode of burning up the Quran in one of the churches in Florida. We cannot say that they are ignorant people. They are people that are dealing with the internet and the high technology, etc. But the minds are still closed. And we do not accuse them only. We also, on our side, we have the same. So this clash of civilizations, or this crisis in relations among civilizations, does exist. But it exists as a result of the very serious wrong enthusiasm on both sides, the wings that believe in clash, in violence, in excluding the other. This we will have to deal with. We cannot afford to continue to have this crisis in relations among civilizations, because it will affect all other issues and facets of life. It will create, increase, support the terrorism, violence, clash. So I put this as one of the issues that we have to deal with in this next decade. The third one would deal with environment and climate change. Climate change is not a new item anymore. We are witnessing the effects of climate change, as we have seen in Pakistan, and before that in Haiti, and before that in the United States, and so on. This has become a recurrent trend with very serious repercussions, social repercussions, economic repercussions, and even more than that, and I'll come to that later. So the failure of Copenhagen summit should not be permitted to continue. The issue of climate change is affecting the economic lives, the social situation, and also the security situation in several countries. Because if we read a lot about and follow the developments in this field of climate change, we will find that there is a possibility that countries will submerge, countries will disappear, totally disappear. And this puts a lot of responsibility on us to create a problem of refugees, a problem of disappearance of states, and where to put all this, and how to deal with it, and the effects of it on its neighbors, and so on. The fourth point, important point, is the non-proliferation of proliferation of nuclear weapons. And here I wish to commend and support President Obama's call for zero nuclear, which he promoted back in 2009 in Prague. And then the subsequent steps taken between US and Russia, and the general enthusiasm that we all are dealing with when it comes to the field of disarmament, in particular nuclear disarmament. In the Middle East, we feel that because we have a very tense nuclear situation, and the threats of proliferation of nuclear weapons, not only because of Iran, but because of Israel. And if we want to address this issue, we have to address it properly. We want to establish a zone free from nuclear weapons in the Middle East that should include all countries, including Iran, Israel, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, etc., all the rest, no exception. That's why we need more intelligent, more positive, away from double standards when we deal with the non-proliferation issues. Then comes the fifth important point in my thinking, which is the regional conflicts. And the time has come for us to do our utmost to put an end to the major conflicts, regional conflicts. The Middle East, there will be negotiations soon. We hope that there will not be a déjà vu kind of exercise. Want to be serious? Because this problem, so-called Arab-Israeli conflict, will never be resolved through pressure in favor of one party. It has to be a just and fair solution. And I hope, I trust that President Obama will follow this rule in trying to bring about a fair solution for both sides, Palestinians and Israelis, in accordance with international law and rule of justice and fairness. We hope that this will not be just a déjà vu kind of performance. And we also hope that this will come to an end within 1 year, no more. But there are other problems too, emerging in Balkan, in Asia, in Latin America, etc. All those, and in the Mediterranean, all those problems will have to be resolved or addressed seriously, not for the sake of the show. The point number 6 pertains to the emerging crisis: water crisis, food crisis, energy crisis. Those 3 issues will have to be taken seriously. It is being said that come the year 2050, there will be a crisis in water. Now it is 2010, so we have 40 years to go. We have to get ready to pull our act together, work together, because this crisis will affect all of us as human beings. how to do it, what kind of money is needed, what should we do, shouldn't we act immediately? We have to discuss it, and discuss it in a serious manner, and not an individual manner if each country is going its own way. This also goes to the food crisis and the energy crisis. They are not an impossible things to solve, but they need all of us to work together to reach it. Then I come to the final point concerning the need for a more adequate international system. And I would mention in particular, because of the shortness of time for the intervention, I might elaborate on that later on, how to maintain and in fact support the UN system, which is the system that talks on behalf of all of us. The Prime Minister mentioned the G20, which is doing a good job, but it is not a representative body. It does not represent the whole community of the international community. It does not. The UN does. The group of 20 cannot be just transferred to the UN system, because in the UN system we have to elect, not to be told this and that would be leading a solution of those problems. I even wish to promote the idea that the Security Council should be entrusted with the consideration of certain major developmental questions. The water crisis, the energy crisis, the effects of climate change will have to be put before the Security Council. You cannot put an issue of some effects to part of the territories of the country before the Security Council, and not put the effects of the total disappearance of a country before the Security Council, with all the repercussions that all of us know, including the major questions of problems of refugees and so on. The Security Council should be entrusted with this, and I recall that the United Kingdom back in 1989 or 90 was of this opinion, that certain developmental issues will have to be transferred from the General Assembly, from the Economic and Social Council, even from the IMF and World Bank, to the Security Council to consider it. Not necessarily to transfer them totally, but the Security Council will have to put his contribution to the consideration of such problems. And here, I would say, I don't know whether Colin Powell would agree with me or not, that when the Security Council, if and when the Security Council comes to the consideration of those issues, no veto power will apply. On developmental issues, veto power has to be curtailed. And in this, I believe we will be introducing a new item, a new idea in the international work, the global work, to preserve the interests of all the peoples, poor and rich, and at the same time would face the challenges of the future. I hope that this will happen in the next decade. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Secretary General. You mentioned several points that are inspiring and that simply ask to consider further, and I hope we'll come to that later on, including the one that you mentioned at the end of the institutional changes in the UN and in bringing new issues in the Security Council, or possibly a new council to deal with that, but also several other issues that I'll come to that later. I want to come to our next speaker, who is coming from India, Her Excellency Ms. Praneeth Kaur. We are very happy that she came back to Slovenia, so welcome back to Bled. We are happy, we thank you for your commitment to this Bled Forum. Ms. Kaur is Minister of State for External Affairs of the Republic of India, She's been this since last year. She was pretty new when she came last year at the meeting. And during her political career, Ms. Kaur served as a member of the parliament, as well as member of various committees. The latter include inter alia Standing Committee on Water Resources, Consultative Committee for Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas, and Committee on Empowerment of Women, which we talk a lot also lately. Ms. Kaur is actively involved in social work and in the organization of the Red Cross. So, Your Excellency, I want to give you the floor to present your thoughts from India.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I feel privileged to be here today with you for the BLED Strategic Forum 2010. I'm thankful to the organizers, particularly the Honorable Minister for Foreign Affairs, Slovenia, Mr. Samuel Zobager, for having invited me here. And it really is a pleasure to be here a second time in this very beautiful part of the world. India attaches great importance to the BLED Strategic Forum, and that explains why I am here for the second consecutive year. I look forward to being enriched by the decisions of this year's forum. If the global outlook for the next decade has to be summarized in one word, it would be challenging. And among the major challenges which call for global collaboration, the most immediate which would need to be tackled within the next decade are sustainable development, energy security, the water challenge, and last but not the least, international terrorism. Furthermore, these challenges impact on global development, prosperity, and security. There is an old Indian saying, "The world is one family." Indeed, the world is linked today, and the interdependence leaves us no choice but to find common solutions for the benefit of mankind. Our natural resources are finite and are depleting fast. It is imperative that they not only be utilized judiciously, but we also reduce our reliance on them. Decades ago, the father of our nation, Mahatma Gandhi, had said, "The earth has enough resources to meet people's needs, but will never have enough to satisfy people's greed." Energy is necessary for the development process, and developing countries require reliable access to competitively priced energy supplies to plan out their economic growth to uplift their citizens out of poverty. Given this effect on pollution and the dwindling supply of fossil fuels, it has become imperative for both the developed and the developing countries to seriously pursue renewable sources of energy. Simultaneously, efforts should be made to enhance the efficiency of existing energy systems. In India, we adopted a national action to combat climate change, which is based on a multi-pronged approach. Our vision is to make India's economic development energy efficient. Over a period of time, we want to pioneer a graduated shift from economic activity based on fossil fuels to one based on non-fossil fuels, and from reliance on non-renewable energy and depleting sources of energy to renewable sources of energy. In this strategy, the sun occupies center stage, as it should, being literally the original source of all energy. India plans to pool its scientific, technical, and managerial talents with sufficient financial resources to develop solar energy as the principal source of abundant energy to power our economy and to transform the lives of our people. Our success in this endeavor will change the face of India. We hope that it would also enable India to change the destinies of the people around the world. We have launched an ambitious solar mission in January this year, and the aim is to deploy 20,000 megawatts of solar power by 2022. While exploring new technologies, we should simultaneously focus on existing energy technologies as well. This focus should be on efficiency of operations of the plant level, reducing transmission and distribution losses, and use of fuel-efficient delivery and consumption systems. The challenge of water is obviously important. Our focus, therefore, is to increase the efficiency of water use, exploring efficient operations to augment water supply, and ensure more efficient management of water resource. The challenge is to ensure optimum water utilization in both agriculture and industry. Notwithstanding the fact that India has large river systems, groundwater accounts for nearly 70% of our total available water resource. Nearly 55% of our irrigation requirements and 50% of urban and industrial requirements are taken care by groundwater. To optimize the use of groundwater, various measures have been put into place. In urban areas, mandatory water harvesting and artificial recharge is in place. Sewage treatment plants are now mandatory for all industrial and commercial buildings and residential apartments. These measures have helped in bringing the gap between availability and requirement, and more importantly, on recharging the groundwater table. Climate change is another major global challenge. India is prepared to play its role as a responsible member of the international community and make a contribution to mitigate its impact. India has engaged actively in multilateral negotiations in the UN framework, Convention on Climate Change, in a positive, constructive, and forward-looking manner. Our common objective should be to establish an effective, cooperative, and equitable global approach based on the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities enshrined in the UNFCCC. On our part, we are doing all that is possible within the limits of our resources. Our recent announcement to make a voluntary target of reducing the emissions intensity of India's GDP by 20 to 25% by 2020, together with our commitment that our per capita emissions would never exceed those of the developed countries, is a manifestation of the seriousness in which we seek to address the climate change issue. Terrorism poses a serious danger to any civilized society. It subverts the economic and financial environment for growth and deprives ordinary men and women of their basic needs, livelihood, and even their lives. It also necessitates enhanced military and security expenditure, which under more conditions could have been devoted to tackling the problems of poverty, ignorance, and disease. Having large financial and material resources at their disposal, terrorist groups today are able to use modern communication systems and the state-of-the-art technology to pursue their agenda. They have become far more sophisticated, better networked, and are also highly motivated in carrying out their nefarious designs. As a matter of extreme concern, it is also their linkage with organized crime like drug trafficking, gun running, counterfeit currency, and money laundering. Terrorists have no faith or religion. They do not belong to any community. No community or religion can and should be blamed for irresponsible and violent acts of a few individuals. Terrorists break the law of the land and deprive the innocent persons of their fundamental right to live. No cause or grievance can justify terrorism. The scourge of terrorism must be resolutely opposed, and measures to combat terrorism have to be comprehensive and sustained. In this regard, there is an urgent need to seek the expeditious conclusion of negotiations on the Comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism at the UN, which has been pending in the UN since 1996. Terrorism knows no boundaries, hence its solution has to transcend boundaries. It is only the strength of our resolve and the ever-expanding frontiers of our knowledge supported by science and technology that can help us to meet these challenges. Sharing experiences and best practices holds the key to addressing them. We may not find all the solutions, but nevertheless, we should not be found wanting in spirit and cooperation and sincerity of our purpose. And these are the two qualities that the BLED conference has come to be associated with. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your thoughts and for presenting India's view on what are the challenges ahead of us. I think some of them we'll touch later on. I also believe that our main sponsor, Bissol, will be very happy, was very happy probably when they heard that you're putting so much efforts and energy into the solar energy. I think they already found a new region to move. But now I'll move to my dear colleague, Ambassador Antonio Patriota. We served together in New York, we served together in Washington, and we both served in Beijing as well, so we have a similar career, and very happy that he came to Slovenia to present the Brazilian view, Brazil as part of the BRIC countries, as one of the important players in climate change discussions, important players in Doha Round discussions. Mr. Patriota, he's Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Federal Republic of Brazil since 2009. And as I mentioned before, he served in several places, including in New York, Washington, from where he came back to be the Deputy Minister. So Ambassador Patriota, Your Excellency, I want to ask you to present your views on what's next decade from the Brazilian point of view.
Well, thank you so much, Samuel, and it certainly is a pleasure to be here in Bled with such a distinguished panel looking at the next decade. And I think there's much that I can agree with that was said by the previous speakers. Certainly our own diagnosis is not very different. The challenges we face, perhaps the order of priority would be a little unique to Brazil. As many of you know, President Lula has been placing great emphasis on the fight against poverty and hunger. In a world of 6 billion people, 1 billion people still don't eat adequately, and this is something that can be solved. There's enough food being produced. It's a question of adopting the right policies and the right collective approach to the challenge. Now, tying in with this big challenge are the other economic, financial, trade issues that are being now dealt with in the G20 and other venues. Certainly, we today can say that some of the old conventional wisdoms of the past are being questioned. There is no longer a sense that the more developed economically are necessarily wiser in adopting economic policy, and whereas this creates some tension, I think it also should be welcomed as an opportunity for more equal debates, for partnerships, as President Daniel Turk was saying, in trying to tackle the big economic challenges of the future. Another important chapter, climate change, obviously, in the entire environmental agenda. We have also the whole peace and security agenda, which assumes different configurations. Terrorism, certainly, and we should remind ourselves that there are many types of fundamentalism. No doubt there is Islamic fundamentalism, but there are other types of fundamentalism in the developed world. There is Islamophobia, there is immigrant phobia, and all of these should be on our agenda for the next decade. And in addition to that, I would agree that non-proliferation, the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, should be placed very high. This is one of the main sources of instability, and when we look at some of the most unstable areas of the world, I agree with Mr. Musa, the Middle East, Israel, Palestine, and Iran. We must try to establish solutions that do not create double standards, that do not convey messages that will turn against our objectives. Now, one of the challenges that we're dealing with has to do with the fact that all of these different situations present themselves in a very rapidly evolving international scenario. In fact, it's possible to argue that we don't even have the right vocabulary to describe the geopolitical configuration we have today, because there are elements of unipolarity with the United States no doubt still representing the strongest military power and the #1 economic power. And then you have Europe, a formidable economic group with its own challenges and perhaps a lesser political voice than we would like to see in the world, as Europe seems to present to many societies and some members in Europe more than others perhaps, a picture of a capitalism with a more human face that seems very attractive to some intermediately developed powers. And then you have the so-called emerging powers, but even here, not all of them are emerging. Russia, for example, was a superpower in the 20th century. China has been a formidable power in Asia in the past and is rising to be perhaps, along with the United States, a kind of new bipolar configuration itself. So out of the BRICS, for example, it would be possible to argue that India and Brazil are the real true emerging powers, two countries that are assuming greater responsibilities and greater influence in world affairs and that had not done so previously. Now, recently there was a seminar in Brazil that I helped to organize on global governance, and a set of scenarios were examined as providing possible developments for the next decade. One of them, the most benign scenario, would be cooperation among traditional powers, the US, Europe, China, Russia, and the emerging powers, including the less developed countries of the world. Now, this could be done through mechanisms such as the G20, and I agree entirely with Secretary Amr Moussa that the G20's prospects for success require that it stay in close dialogue with the G172. Or in other words, there is no prospect for the G20 to succeed if it closes itself from the rest of the world, from the rest of the United Nations in particular, which is the true world parliament, the only universal assembly that we have at this moment. But there are other possibilities that could emerge in the coming years. One is a competition for different fora, where the G20 would try to accomplish certain things, but the G8 would continue to exist, and then the recommendations that are given by one or the other are not necessarily carried out by the IMF and the World Bank. We wouldn't know what necessarily would be happening with the United Nations. Some situations would be dealt with there, some would be dealt with regionally or in other venues. Even more worryingly, there could be systemic failure. That could be a tendency not for a great part of humanity or a great part of the international community not to take in consideration what is decided in fora such as the Security Council, because some parts of the world will feel that it is not representative enough, that it does not necessarily reflect the contemporary international community. So I would say that one of the main challenges we face is a challenge of governance. And if I can speak a little bit about the Brazilian perspective, I would say that Brazil approaches this challenge in the coming years as a country that has made very significant inroads in combating poverty, that has committed itself to sustainable development. And if I can allow myself to disagree a little bit with what Prime Minister Pajor had said before, I think few countries in the world with the economy of the size of Brazil have a cleaner energy matrix. 45% of our energy is renewable, with a 13% at OECD. I believe Richard Bauscher from OECD is here, and he confirmed those figures. In addition to that, when one reduces poverty, one is greatly contributing also to reduce CO2 emissions and to ensure that one is contributing to a reduction in environmental hazard. If one looks at peace and security, we consider that Brazil can also make a significant contribution, having created an environment in South America of cooperation, economic and trade cooperation, certainly political dialogue to overcome tensions, having contributed significantly to peacekeeping operations around the world, and in Haiti being a particular case. But the way we see our participation in more restricted groups that formulate recommendations for the rest of the international community is one that will attempt not to reproduce some of the asymmetries of the past. So this is where we must be very careful not to sit at a restricted table and ignore what the smaller participants in the international community believe. I think many of you will remember how Tuvalu, a country of 20,000 people in the Pacific, played a very important role at the Copenhagen conference, and I think it's desirable that it should be this way. We need to ensure that all voices are heard. In fact, one word that has not come up today yet is the word democracy, and I think for all those who defend democracy internally, we should also aim at establishing a more democratic and representative international system. So in concluding, I would like to refer to the very inspired words of President Danilo Turk, who spoke of intellectual honesty, realism, and imagination. I will add that perhaps what we will need in the coming years is also political leadership that reflects these qualities. Now, what do I mean by political leadership? I think there are ways of assuming political leadership that looks at what public opinion can accept to the left, to the right, and then tries to establish a kind of average and stays within the realm of the possible without dreaming beyond the status quo. But I think the kind of political leadership we need is precisely the leadership that can anticipate problems, take risks, and look beyond our immediate parochial agendas, reflecting our responsibility as global actors. And I think in this sense, Slovenia should be commended for bringing the world to Bled today and showing that it is ready to reconcile its local responsibility with global responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your contribution. Now we are opening the floor for comments, for questions. We have around half an hour to do that. So I will just open the floor. If you want to raise a question, please just stand up and tell it. I see already one, so I have some questions, but I want to give the audience a chance, so please go ahead.
Underline
and if you can introduce yourself also. So
my name is Walter Lichem. I'm from Austria, and I'm former UN and Austrian ambassador. I'm dealing with the global agenda to this very day as a consultant in Africa and in Latin America. But one issue that I see as a key challenge for the 21st century, it has been mentioned by three of the speakers, to whom I want to thank for the brilliant presentations that you all have made. That is the process of societal disintegration, whether you call it xenophobia or immigrant phobia, whether you refer to the basis of exclusion that leads to terrorism and violence. 99.7% of the victims of violence, military violence, today occur in internal conflicts. The OECD report, Growing Unequal, is also drawn to this process of disintegration. In the 21st century and the next 10 years, we will have an enhanced challenge by this process of societal disintegration, and we are in need of societal development visions, programs, and action. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for adding another challenge that somehow fits into what we're discussing. Does anybody wants to comment on that? No. I will then. I will have a question for the panelists, because several of you were talking about the problems. We are talking about the climate change and how the Copenhagen conference was not successful. That was already talked by our leaders before. We talked about the Millennium Goals. Secretary General of the Arab League talked about the Millennium Goals and how there might be even more poverty today than it was before. We were talking about the clash of civilization, or you Mr. Musa, mentioned how that that is a challenge that is continue to be ahead of us. We talked about the food shortage as a big problem, and my Indian colleague mentioned the very nice Gandhi expression that, if I translate, was that there is enough food for everybody, but it's not enough for if you're greedy, or it was nicely said, but in a way. So it seems we are all aware of the problems. We might even be aware of the solutions, but we are not doing it. We are looking at Pakistan, waters. We are looking at all these climate change things. We have volcano in fire, and we have oil spills in the seas. We have strange things happening, and we are watching that. We are concerned. We are aware that it's getting worse, but yet we are not doing anything. I think that switch in mentality that it's needed to come maybe to new institutions, new mechanisms, new treaties, new decisions, it's not coming. Antonio mentioned before the need of the leadership. Probably, yes, also the need of the leadership in the future. But how do we make this switch from when we are realizing that the world is going into a dangerous situation, from environment to maybe security, to water resources, to food, all this, and yet we are not making the change in the way we are approaching the problems. Anybody wants to have any ideas? You, Secretary General, mentioned before the need to change the institution in the or the way the Security Council is the Security Council should function. Many of you mentioned the need to change the Security Council, but you mentioned that it should bring new topics, the energy security, the climate change issue, that this should be brought into the Security Council. Is this the way? Can this bring the needed change? Security Council at the same time is not represented, and majority of the member states don't take it as representing themselves. Do we need a new Economic Security Council, as I know you mentioned before? Some of the questions, if you can comment.
I really comment on the question from our Austrian friend. I believe he introduced a very important dimension, the societal disintegration. This is also a very important point that we have to add to the problems that we have to face. We feel that in our societies, and we see that when we witness that, we live that when visiting other countries. The social situation in the world is no better than the economic situation in the world. This would bring up the discussion about education, about the upbringing, about how to deal with such major problems. But we need leadership, and the concept of leadership was mentioned, I believe, by you, Antonio. So we need leadership. Where is this leadership? It cannot be the G8. It is not representative. They can perform a certain form of leadership, but not the leadership, global leadership, that everybody, the poor guy in his field, or the poor mother in her hut, it's a different story. So we need the leadership, even if the Security Council is not representative according to the presently constituted. But it is definitely more representative than all other groupings outside the UN system. We want to marry both. That we want an effective Security Council, effective UN organs that reflect or be really representative of the international community to deal with the societal ills, the economic problems, and take into consideration the real situation on the ground in developing nations and the poverty and so on. We need that. We need leadership, and collective leadership for that matter. This collective leadership could be reflected better in the United Nations than in any other organ outside of it.
Anybody else wants to comment on? Yes, Prime Minister.
much. I would like to add a little comment about governance and leadership as far as, for instance, poverty is concerned. We are talking about global outlook for the next decade and about global governance, and I think this is the main issue we have to solve, one of the main issues we have to solve. But speaking on behalf of one of the members of the G10 in the world, I mean the countries that are donating at least 0.7 of their GDP, of their gross domestic product, to developing countries, to the third world, I would like to say that sometimes there is also a lack of leadership and of governance within these less developed and within developing countries. And well, I don't think we have to go in detail, but this is also a problem, and this is a moral question we have to face. The question about countries we try to help, where we try to help the population, and where we see that because of a lack of governance, because of a lack of the right choice, put the investments in the right, in education, in farming and so on, people still starve from hunger, people are still very poor, and we can't tackle the poverty in these countries. So there is also sometimes, when we are talking about poverty and about the MDGs in that field, there is an enormous responsibility within the less developed countries.
Thank you. Iska, you wanted to comment?
Thank you. I think the leadership problem that you have mentioned is certainly a very large part of the responsibility of how we take the situation we are in today. We are already in the process of the climate change. It's a reality. It's not something that we are thinking is going to happen. And taking this into consideration, I think in most of the developing countries, we really need to put an emphasis on our education system so that the people are empowered with the knowledge of what it is actually going to happen with the climate change and how it is going to affect us. I think if it is, there is a sustained program to educate them, even the people who are not very educated but who work on the grassroots level, who are farmers, they will certainly have to know that they have to change their system or their seasons of what they plant and how they plant, and how we can ensure the food security of our country and get to of the world actually, because as we are saying, it's the global, we are looking at the next decade in the global sense. And I think in this global sense, we need, through the UN, through the world bodies, to discuss and see how in each country we can go through with what kind of program to ensure that the climate change, which is happening, is going to happen, how we can adapt and live according to that. And I also think that in the developed countries, this realization must go down more, because we have got very used to living very comfortable lives with what we have, and how to, if you want to sustain that, what kind of energy quality we have. And I'm very happy that today this global conference is one of the sponsors is for solar energy, which I think will really be the turning point of our energy crisis. So I think that, as Secretary General and everybody else have said, we need as a world to come together and to deal with the crisis, because everything that happens in any corner of the world, whether it's a terrorist attack or whether it's a famine or a drought or a tsunami or anything that's related these days, it is going to affect everybody, because we're all interrelated and it's a very small world today. Thank you.
Thank you. Antonio, you want to add something? Okay.
Sharing a microphone here with Egypt, but no, really two brief comments on societal breakdown. I think it really has to do with inequality and inequality of opportunity within and among states to a certain degree. And I agree that education is probably one of the best antidotes to this. Now, the challenge being that education takes some time to produce the desired results. And I can give you an example even on my own country. If one looks at Brazil, the places where you see more criminality, more youthful delinquents are actually the two largest cities in Brazil, Rio and São Paulo. Now, why is that the case? Probably, and there are many studies that indicate this, because of the extreme contrast between wealth and poverty within a small area. In the Northeast, where you have lower income per capita, but you have more equality, you don't have as big challenges. And in the south of the country, where the per capita income is higher than the average in Rio and São Paulo, the same applies. So I think there are some lessons to be derived here, and if one doesn't tackle inequality through social programs that reduce inequality by assisting the lower segments of society and providing health assistance, education, etc., we probably will be facing a more dire situation in the future. Now, just to comment briefly on your question on the environment on Copenhagen, I think I would agree with the stance taken by President Turk, again, in his introductory remarks, that Copenhagen did not correspond to most of the aspirations of the international community, but at the same time it could have been worse. And the agreement that was struck is one that, for our part, we encourage many others around the world to adhere to. There's a new phenomenon at stake here which should not be underestimated, which is the fact that developing countries that are not committed under the Kyoto Protocol to assume specific targets for CO2 reductions are actually assuming very ambitious targets. And Brazil is giving an example in this sense. Not only did we announce this at Copenhagen, but we also enshrined this into national legislation a few months after we announced it. So now it's become national law. I think movements of this kind need to be recognized and valued, and unless we recognize that this is a collective responsibility, a collective effort, where we cannot project into another country or another set of countries' responsibility or exclusive responsibility for finding the solutions, we are probably not going to make the kind of progress that we need.
Thank you. Okay, I'll give you the floor, sir, please.
My name is Stane Pejonik. I'm rector of the University of Ljubljana. I agree completely what has been just said. The inequality, the differences is a huge problem, and they are growing. And I would like to ask you regarding the knowledge. About the 90% of the new knowledge is generated, produced in the rich world. About 2/3 of it is financed by private companies. So only 10% of the knowledge is generated in the rest of the world. And I would like to ask you, if 2/3 of the knowledge, this 90%, is paid, financed by the private companies, are the politicians the real decision makers? Definitely they are not the only one. So I believe the mutual play between the private capital and the policy is more than needed in the next decade.
That's probably another proof of the globalization, I think, that we talked before. I said in my opening statement that I was talking about security situation in the world, that not a single country, not a group of countries, not all countries together can provide the global security. But that goes for everything, because you have so many non-state actors that are influential, and actually they're out of control. And there might be discussion about how to regulate that on the terrorist front, which my Indian colleague mentioned, or other on the other aspects as well. If nobody else wants to comment, I took it as the. I will turn around. Yes. Sorry. I think first I saw here one colleague, and then I'll come over there as well.
Hello, distinguished panel. I'm Artis Pabriks, former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Latvia and member of the Parliament. Obviously, we have been dealing in this panel with, let's say, issues of survival for humanity, and like climate change, like water issues, and we'll still go on with this. But I wanted a little bit to hear some type of speculations on your side about another thing, about the good governance. And don't you think that the next decade we might experience a certain decline in the matters of democracy, human rights, and values in policy in general? Because we know that the number of international organizations are going through the, let's say, the re-evaluation of their positions, including NATO, United Nations, OEC, etc. We also know that not all countries which are so-called rising stars or rising economies are the most ardent supporters of democracy. So we can have the good representation of nations, 172 in the world, but would it mean also not less democracy, knowing that Europe and United States are, I would say, a little bit of declining power in this global perspective? And what would that leave for the people? What would that leave for the general democratic level? So would you a little bit speculate about that? Thank you.
Thank you. Who wants to comment? You want to comment? Maybe the biggest democracy?
Thank you. India is the largest democracy that's existing. It's very diverse, and we're very proud of the fact that in spite of different languages, different customs, different languages, we have a very strong democratic system. We are at the moment in a stage where we are having a coalition government, and this has been there for the last 3-4 governments that have been in power. And it's something that's there to stay, because aspirations of various regions are high, but it's a very good forum for them to come into parliament, to come into local assemblies and give vent to this. I think the honorable member sitting, he mentioned something about the so-called rising powers, which may not be so democratic, and a lot of human rights and other things coming up. This is also, in a way, democratic, because every country has a right to rule the way they want to. Also, I think that it is the democratic system that has allowed so many various organizations to come forward to look after the concerns of people. And the human rights is certainly one of them, and a lot of other organizations that have come up, and they do help in keeping the governance in check and making sure that it is delivering a fair governance. Nothing is ever perfect in life, but I think that people are the best judge of that, and they will always vote in or deliver some kind of judgment as to how they want their country governed, in whichever form they want it governed, at a stage when they're absolutely fed up of whatever there is already. So I think in that way, it's a natural way that people will take care of their own needs and how they want to be governed.
Very good. Thank you. And now, sir, on this side.
Thank you very much. My name is Suleiman Al-Herbish. I'm the Director General of OPEC Fund for International Development in Vienna. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much and congratulations for such a wonderful organization of this forum. Since the floor is open for comments, I just would like to take this opportunity to remind the panelists and the audience, of course, of whenever we talk about Millennium Development Goals, we ignore one of the most important development goals, which is eradication of energy poverty, which is now gaining respect and publication. And I would like to bring to your attention that in this year, March this year, the gathering or the 12th Ministerial Conference of the Energy Producers and Consumers in Cancun. More than 65 countries, including all consumers, major consumers and producers, decided to recommend the addition of a 9th Millennium Development Goal, which is the eradication of energy poverty, or sometimes they refer to it as energy for the poor. And this is warranted by the fact that as we are talking now and gathering here, you have 1.7 billion people in the whole world deprived from electricity. You have 2.7 or 2.5 sometimes a billion people relying on biomass and dung. This is, I think, is very important that this respected forum take note of this. And I think eradication of energy poverty should be really given a priority. In that forum, in that conference, we heard for the first time the executive directors of the IEA saying that you can never think of the energy security problem in isolation of eradication of energy poverty or energy for the poor. So this new goal is gaining momentum and respect, and I would like to bring it to your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, and thank you for bringing this issue into our discussions and drawing your attention to this discussion. I just want to raise one issue, the last question before there's another one, but I want to pose one before that, if you may. We still have some 10 minutes, and that is migration. It was mentioned before as an issue, as a phobia, and also it somehow links to what I guess from Austria was saying. So my question would be, maybe I'll ask Prime Minister of Belgium first, because this will be an issue that is coming for the next decade to Europe. It's coming to Slovenia as well. We ourselves are dealing with a problem of aging population, with a drop in the number of population, with different jobs that Slovenes don't do. Now, currently, we have the problem that we don't have enough doctors to fill the hospitals. So this is an issue that should come into our discussions in Slovenia and within the EU, probably the same, but I haven't seen it yet. It's a difficult issue from different point of view. So do you have any thoughts of how this issue will come in the next decade in Europe?
Well, anyway, it's one of the 5 to 6 priorities of the Belgian presidency of the European Union, namely to put in place the measures that were decided, I think it was last year in Stockholm, the Stockholm program, where for the first time in a very comprehensive way, a whole set of common measures was decided upon, and the whole of the question now is to implement them. I think you mentioned very rightly the problem of the aging of the population. Another typical characteristic of Europe is that it has an enormous border with seas and with an ocean, and that it is surrounded by continents and countries that have less welfare than itself. It's the same situation, of course, between Mexico and the United States, but very typical for Europe is that we have a history of migration, a history of migratory fluxes, but it is one of our priorities to try to build up this European citizenship, not only in the content for the European citizen themselves, but also as a start, as a set of criteria to know what kind of people can come, under what conditions, how they can stay within the European Union. And so in the coming months, I hope that in the so-called JAI Council, we will make some progress in that field. There are some elements of actuality which puts tensions in the dossier. There was actuality in France during the last weeks with the problem of the Roma people, but I'm confident that in the coming weeks and months we will find political space, political room to put in place what was decided in Stockholm. A good migration policy is, amongst other solution to the problem of the aging of population and the lack of enough people in with some professional skills we we need in Europe. It's besides that really a necessity to keep law and order within a continent like the European Union. So yes, it's our duty to make progress, but I'm confident that on the basis of the Stockholm Programme we can take the right decisions in the coming weeks and months.
Thank you. Sir, over here. The first who stands. Okay, over there.
Giga Turk, Secretary General of the Reflection Group on the Future of Europe. Minister Bogar, congratulations on the organization of this conference. It looks like it will be another very good event. My question is mainly to the three panel members not from the EU. I think it was Ambassador Patriota who mentioned that the issue of global governance is one of the major issues that in the next decade the world has to solve. And my question, or two questions, are the following. Can the European Union be the model on how to solve these multilateral issues and multilateral governance among countries? And if Europe is not yet fit to do so, what it should do within itself to be capable of showing the way, of showing the model? And as a small PS to my boss, Rector Pejonik, he was complaining that there are too many people who are creating knowledge and the influence of politicians is so small. I think it's good. I think it's good that the scientists are actually showing us the world where it goes forward. Thank you.
Well, let me put it this way. I think the European Union is certainly a model and an inspiration for other exercises in regional integration. And when I look at my own region, for example, the Mercosur common market certainly looks at the experience of the European Union to try to replicate its more successful aspects and perhaps avoid some of the pitfalls and some of the difficulties that it has run across. And I think that as we look at South America more broadly and we try to establish a South American Union of Nations, as we are now trying to, we will try to, again, implement policies and mechanisms that have worked elsewhere. And, you know, there are a number of examples that we can draw inspiration from, including the European Union. Now, in looking at global governance, I'm not sure the European Union provides an adequate example because one of the big challenges in global governance is dealing with very disparate members in terms of level of development, in terms of world outlook, in terms of culture, religion, civilization, etc. And the European Union, as are other regional groups, are pretty much groups of the like-minded. So the big challenge here is how to deal with those who are not like-minded, how to make more democratic, representative, and how to incorporate new voices that are legitimate and that are not being heard into mechanisms that will ensure the best results. On that front, I think what we would favor is, of course, is to build upon what we already have rather to attempt revolutionary approaches. And, you know, there's a lot of positive things that one can say about the UN with all its shortcomings. I agree with what Amr Moussa was saying, that in spite of the fact that many parts of the world don't feel that the Security Council is currently representative, that it is still the preferable venue for discussing issues of peace and security. In fact, we view with great concern attempts at dealing with those challenges outside the Security Council. So an evolutionary approach that will build upon what we have and try to incorporate new voices in a spirit of global responsibility, collective responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you, and I think that we should come to a close. We should close slowly this panel because the last question already somehow started the next panel on the EU as a global player. One thing I think that is coming in the next decade is also regional cooperation, or regional integrations. What I see, what we witness is that the regions are integrating more and more. European Union, of course, is already integrated. We are seeing, Brazilian colleague just mentioned the Mercosur as the integration within the Latin America. I know that Arab League or League of Arab States is also discussing being more integrated, having the ministers meeting, the parliaments meeting, is going itself, as I understand it, to a kind of reform to get more integration of this regional cooperation. So probably we might see in the future or in the next decade more of this regional group, this regional cooperation, and maybe a completely new level of cooperation on a global scale. If the question for there is very short, I would ask you to pose it, so I don't want really to be rude. So I give you the floor, and then I will conclude.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. I am Mamir Đurović, and I come from Montenegrin Academy of Sciences and Arts. It was a pleasure listening to panelists and having their opinion how to recognize what are the major problems we are going to face the next decade and in the future. But that's the only one side of the problem. The more important is how we are looking to solve the problem. The last century, let me point out, has been characterized with re-establishing many old states and establishing many new states, generally small states. Now we are living in the world where probably majority of the states are small states, not by population, by power, by everything. We haven't generated in the same manner the problems you recognize, and we all do recognize. But we do experience the consequences of such problems probably in small states worse than in the bigger states. I would be very pleased to hear the opinion of panelists on the role of the small states in the global outlook in the next decade concerning the general problems, global problems we are concerned with. Thank you very much, Mr. Panelist.
Thank you. I think you already framed a panel for next year. I think that the role of the small states in the global affairs is pretty much something that we are interested in dealing in the foreign ministry as well. If somebody has a short comment, I would ask. I don't see. I think that's something to reflect. These are all representatives of the bigger states. But you know that the bigger states would not know that they're big unless there were many small states around. But I believe that you know, small states can play a role and do play a role, and also Slovenia, by raising these issues today and these 2 days, I think can play a role in bringing the issues up front, in trying to look for solutions, and then using them in the real fora. So I want to conclude here because it's time for next panel. I want to thank very much the panelists for participating, for answering the questions, for very interesting and stimulating debate. We will try to follow up with some recommendations. We'll try to bring some recommendations, some ideas from these panels and circulate them or use them in discussions that we'll have them. I want to thank the audience for being constructive, for posing the right questions. I don't want to sum up, but I just want to say that what I understood we discussed was that there's many uncertainty and many challenges ahead of us in the next decade, that all the problems are global and solutions will be global, but will have to be found through a democratic institutional international system, and we'll need political leadership, but as the Prime Minister said, we'll need also an optimism to achieve that. So thank you very much, everybody, and I welcome you to wait here for the next panel, very interesting panel on the role of the European Union in the global affairs. Thank you.